Welcome to DCD Colo and Cloud. We had a great day yesterday. Workshops, the Open Compute Foundation were packed. Very strong turnout for that. Our DCD Edge, which is about defining the edge data center and what's coming at us, was very effective. We didn't come to any conclusions. We still can't define the edge. We don't know where it is. We don't know how big it is. We don't know what it looks like, but we had fun. So if you were in the room, I think you enjoyed it as well, and you'll be able to see the whole thing online. We're going to chunk it down so it's not 5 hours of blah, blah, and make it worthwhile. So I flipped the charts on our opening keynotes. And I asked them to, so when you see the titles of their presentations, you'll know that it may or may not pertain. But in the wake of Harvey particularly, I thought we ought to really spend some good quality time thinking about resiliency. So I asked both of our opening keynotes to focus their remarks around what resiliency means today. Has it changed? What's resiliency in the facility? What's resiliency in the cloud? Are we in a transition? What was our experience in Houston as best we know it? What did we learn that we didn't know before? You know, after Sandy in New York, we learned a whole lot fast. And I think Houston was a much better, perhaps a better case. So I'm not going to spend much more time because I want to get right in it. We have 2 opening keynotes followed by an expanded roundtable format panel. And the focus is on resiliency. So I'm going to introduce Francisco Romero, COO of IBM Softlayer, and he's going to talk about cloud and resiliency, I'm sure. So with that, Francisco.
Thank you, Bruce. And good morning to everybody. I'm going to try and make this 15 minutes a little interesting, and I'm going to try and play both sides of various topics that we've got lined up for today. So hopefully it'll spur some discussions afterwards as opposed to me just giving the marketing speech. So the title of this section is the Open Software-Defined Digital Factory of the Future. I would argue that the digital factory of the future is here today, and it's been here for a little while. And most of the things that are going on around the world are coming from data centers, whether it be small in on-premise or whether it be the large mega scale ones. This is where it all happens today, right? As I was trying to, let me figure out how this works. Is it just the black button? Green button, there we go. I was trying to figure out how do I scope this down to something concrete that we can have a conversation about. And Bruce and the team did a great job in terms of lining up the statement for this session as this data center is the environment where both businesses and technology models for software-defined, open-sourced, white box commoditized, highly optimized, and autonomous infrastructure will be designed and developed. So I figured I would get into all of these topics and to Bruce's point with a perspective as well on the resiliency and what it means these days. So with this, software-defined, I think this term has been around a lot. I think it has grown in terms of scope significantly, right? We talked about software-defined networks a few years ago. We talked about virtualization on the compute side. Now we're at the point where storage is virtualized too. The data center is virtualized. And the data center, not just from the perspective of power and cooling, which a lot of you guys are very familiar with. But if I step above and I think about workload, about the users of the data center is becoming a virtualized environment that I can use remotely, right? And if we think about what SDN or software-defined really means in the API economy, It really means that I can control a data center from my desk here in Dallas via APIs, physically speaking, right? The data center itself is software defined, and it'll load balance itself and adjust the cooling and adjust the power distribution, all those fun things. But for me as a user, it means that from my desk, I can fire up instances in this data center and that data center connected through the software-defined network. So the important thing here to realize is software-defined is not just within each one of these tiers and these groups, but it's really one level above. And the power that provides to the end user to be able to design and run everything from their desk. And this has been crucial in terms of resiliency, right? We know now data centers are fallible. The Earth is not playing nice with us lately, hurricanes, earthquakes, you name it, and it's all over the world, not just in certain regions. So we have to recognize that dependency on hardware is hard to build resiliency around. But if, as an end user, I can connect these data centers, I can fire up workloads from my desk in 5 different regions without me having to go talk to every one of your data center guys to get racks and get all that set up, right? That's what enables the resiliency of the future. And it doesn't necessarily have to even involve me knowing anything physically about servers or storage or network or data centers, for that sake. Why is this really, really, really important? Simplicity, portability, resiliency, scalability. Again, the resiliency being one of the key things and lessons that we've learned. The more we can abstract from the physical layer, the more we can do to be resilient. Decoupling hardware, software. Now, here's some of the key questions that we need to ask ourselves. Who owns that coupling? Who owns the software-defined definition and control planes? And this is where software-defined starts getting a little more complicated. There's many vendors, each one of them with their own standards. Me as a user, I depend on what's underneath. I have to understand that to be able to leverage it. So it gets fairly complicated, right? Now, one center of gravity around these is becoming the outsourcers and the cloud providers, in particular the cloud providers, and I'll tell you why in a little bit. Talked about standards. For data centers, what does this mean? So software-defined works really, really well as long as I have a standardized platform underneath. I can't have a data center that has servers from 22 different manufacturers, 18 switches, 5 router types. I can't build automation at that level. So what that means for the data center itself is really that everything will tend to get standardized around whatever the software-defined standard we chose is. And the hardware resiliency really becoming software dependent. And we see it in all cloud providers with the region and availability zone model. That's really what drives that. From my desk, I can spin up multiple data centers. One goes down, doesn't matter. There's things that I have to do, and we'll get into the autonomous part of that. Open sourced. These to me is one of the most interesting topics that we talk about, right? Because open source at the end of the day is, hey, let me not become dependent on a proprietary technology, right? And we have a lot of various examples here. Let's take OpenStack for a second, not to pick on OpenStack. But OpenStack is open, it's a standard, it's great, except it's not quite a standard, right? Because it's only good as a standard as long as many people, most of us, are using it. Otherwise, I have to move from OpenStack to something else, call it proprietary or call it something else that's open source, but I have the same problem as if I were in a proprietary deployment. When IBM acquired Softlayer and there was a big, big push in OpenStack, we got into the discussion of, okay, let's standardize on OpenStack. What version of OpenStack? And we found that IBM was running 11 different OpenStack versions and environments. And those are not interchangeable, right? So again, not to pick on OpenStack, but some of the challenges that open brings to the table, right? There's the discussion about control. I can get into the code and do my own coding and fix the problems and add the features that I want. Well, at that point, it's kind of not open. I'm corralling myself in a corner of my implementation of this thing. Can I do something with it afterwards? Maybe, maybe not. Security, hey, and stability. So many people are using this, it'll become robust. Well, there's a premise here about the robustness coming from the community doing work. How do I get the community to do work on my specific problem, right? And I think one of the challenges, again, not to pick on OpenStack, was the fact that there were a lot of people working on a lot of problems, very broadly speaking, and very few of them were in deep and fundamentally solved the issues. And it leads to a lot of unintended consequences that have led OpenStack not to take as much hold as everybody would have liked. All the enterprises still want to go there. Once they start the journey, they figure out it's a lot harder than they thought it would be. And open's not quite so open. Portability, we've talked about. Is open source that simple? It really depends on a lot of things. And I'll leave this as open comments for you guys. I told you I was going to try and play this on both sides, so to spur some thought. White box, commoditized, and highly optimized. Right? This is one of those things that we hear over and over and over again. Looking at it from the inside out, these two terms are actually opposite. As soon as you start optimizing your hardware, the way all of the cloud providers are doing, right? Tesla with their TPUs, AWS custom gear on servers as well as on networking, Facebook, same thing, IBM, we're at the same point. And then you talk about the white box as being cheap, commodity type servers. So the interesting piece is all the big cloud scale providers are going here to the left, right? Which is highly optimized. But it is not white box. It's all proprietary, it's all custom design, it's all custom built, it's all specific to the problems that the big cloud providers have. And one of the biggest problems there is the scale, not just from the size of the data center, but from the multi-tenancy of the data center. These data centers now have thousands of clients in them. So back to Bruce's point of resiliency, what are some of the things that we learn? When one of these data centers goes down, it doesn't impact 5, 10, a dozen customers. It impacts thousands of customers. And unless those customers understand that there will always be that risk, and how do I de-risk myself, but doing it not by going and building more stuff, but leveraging open, leveraging software-defined, leveraging the cloud to spread my workload across the board. The other interesting piece on this whole white box and highly optimized is, okay, we talk about the non-mega hyperscale cloud providers as being white box, right? Everybody just going to buy cheap commodity servers. Well, the interesting debate there is that side of the world is mostly driven by the large enterprises. And those guys are running very, very old applications, for the most part, on very, very specific hardware that is highly optimized to their workload, right? I think SAP is probably one of the best examples. SAP does not run on white box. You need certified hardware. You need specific network configurations, et cetera, et cetera. So this whole white box kind of gets interesting in terms of, well, who's using it and who's not, and what's it good for and what's it not good for, right? The interesting part of all this is if you look at some data that's been out there for a little bit, where are all of these workloads going? And these are workloads, enterprise workloads, small company workloads, techie workloads, traditional workloads. Where are all these going? These are surveys that were done last year by McKinsey and IDC. And the chart on the left shows you what the perspective of these companies are in terms of where they're going to take their stuff. So in 2015, 80% of large enterprises were saying, hey, we're going to keep our workloads on-premise because we can control them, we have the security, we can define the resiliency, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They expect by 2018 that only 37% of large enterprises are going to continue down that path. As we move to the right, to the more decentralized public IaaS, right, only 10% of enterprises in 2015 said they wanted to go to the public cloud. 2018, 50% are going to the public cloud. And enterprises is interesting because their true center of gravity is not really around public, but it's dedicated private and it's virtual private. So 70% and 60% going in that direction. So as we talk about resiliency, as we talk about hardware, as we talk about software defined, there's now a huge center of gravity around cloud and the full extent of that. What does that mean for data center and hardware? Chart on the right. It tells you about the shift, the left chart on the right side Ship server instances by destination. So in 2015, it is estimated that 65% of all servers were shipped to cloud providers. By 2018, 80% of all servers are going to cloud providers. So this goes back to what we talked about, software defined. All of these have to be software defined. They may or may not run on open architectures, depending on what cloud provider you talk to. And they're going to be highly optimized and very likely custom hardware that goes to enable these types of deployments. Storage capacity on the right side. Today, 60% of all storage capacity going to cloud providers. 2018, 81% going to cloud providers. So this is where the center of gravity is. Is it a good thing or a bad thing? Depends on who you are and what you want to do with it. And just to wrap up, this was one of the very interesting terms that were in that initial scope of the keynote around autonomous. What does autonomous really mean, right? And I think IBM did a very good job in picking up the weather company for a lot of reasons. But one of them was, in 2012, the weather company went through this foundational transformation, and they said, we got to do things differently, right? This is an IoT company that has billions of sensors all over the world. They're the ones that feed the Weather Channel. They're the ones that provide 80% of the weather data that's out there. And they moved into a cloud-based, cloud-agnostic, data-driven API, right? So that's one of the key things, API. Everything is done via APIs. What does that allow them to do? Everything is software-defined. They own no hardware. They have no idea of how to operate a data center. They don't care. They don't know how to run servers. Just give them a VM with a operating system, and they're good to go, right? It self-scales. So if you think about Harvey and what was going on and has been going on with all the hurricanes, people are pinging the weather company. I think their volume went up 20x from pre-hurricanes to what it is right now. They didn't have to go buy gear, buy data center space, figure out what to do. They didn't even have to tell the application, hey, we're seeing a spike. It auto-scales. Fire up more instances, fire up more VMs, get more storage automatically, right? Self-healing, hey, back to the resiliency question. This site went down. Immediately scale on that other side. You see a little bit of latency while the other VMs fire up, while the storage gets transferred, you're up. Right? In terms of resiliency, and back to the software-defined nature of things, right? Don't have to go mess with anything at the physical layer. And then self-managed, everything is automated. Again, to get to self-scaling and self-healing, everything has to be automated. So they're able to run 2.2 billion data points per hour with 4 system admins. Global platform deployed in over 40 locations worldwide. And the most interesting thing I'll leave you about this transformation of pre-2012 and post-2012 is the hardest thing was the mindset and the culture, right? We here are very data center-centric folks, and we build buildings, and it's very hard to change these things. But what I'll leave you with is there is a foundational transformation happening in what's running inside of those data centers that will have a direct impact, and it'll trickle into those data centers, and it's fundamentally changing the way we leverage technology, whether it be for resiliency, whether it be for economy, whether it be for capabilities. And that mindset change is one of the things the biggest tech companies are struggling with, and those that are embracing it and jumping onto this ship of what we talked just now, right? Software-defined, open, optimized hardware, et cetera, those are the guys that are being successful in the market. So when you think about your space, the data centers, how to build resiliency, you got to step back and look at how folks are using this infrastructure these days, and then think about what you need to do a little different, what the data center needs to do, how it needs to behave in terms of your footprint of where you put your data centers. What does the hurricanes and this API-based approach have to do with resiliency, et cetera, et cetera. I'll leave you with those thoughts. Thank you.
So one of the themes that he just touched on that came up yesterday over and over and over again, technology isn't the problem, culture is. Corporate culture, corporate behaviors. In the era of digital transformation, people in the data center and on the IT side can no longer afford to have the same behaviors that got them where they are today. They have to change. So that's going to keep coming up. Ron Batra, who is the Senior Director for Innovation and Strategy at Equinix, is our next keynote. And then we go right into the panel. So Ron.
Thank you, Bruce. Green button, OK. Good morning. We're going to talk about a few things here today. Changing times. They say the only thing constant is change. And then with change, we're going to talk about some strategies for success. What I mean by that is that we talk about change. We hear automation. We hear software defined, as Francisco said. We hear DevOps. There are so many terms in the industry today. But the great news is that volumes are changing. Traffic is changing. So our business is expanding. But succeeding in that does not mean a natural God-given right. One has to position yourself. And our community, the Data Center Colo community, has to do a few things right. I'm going to share some of those which I believe would be strategic to us. So the only thing constant is change. We talk about change happening everywhere. So this chart talks a little bit about the changes that have happened. But when you start from the left, the mainframe era was 70 years ago, 7-0. And then it was open to a few people, a few million people in the world had mainframe access. Then came the minis and the DECWACs and that environment, and then we came to the PCs. There's about 500 million plus business users, but when you add consumers, it's probably in the billions. But now when you talk about cloud, mobile internet, and Internet of Everything, the core is now shifting to the edge. So we talked yesterday a lot about what is the edge, and all of us in the panel had different definitions of what the edge was about. And it's a little bit like that puzzle, where some 5 blind men come and somebody touches an elephant. This is the rope, and this is a trunk, and that kind of a thing. But the point is that cloud has almost 1 billion users in different capacity. If you use Facebook, you are using their cloud. If you're using iTunes, you're using their cloud. And similarly with business applications as well. Mobile internet expands. The Internet of Everything, well, some have said 100 billion, but it's not clear by when. But almost everybody agrees, if not 100 billion, at least 20 billion devices. We are techies here. I probably have 6 to 7 IoT type of stuff in my house, an Alexa here, a couple of Wi-Fi lamps, sprinkler, and blah, blah, blah. But not everybody does that. But the day is not very far when this is going to be very much mainstream. So moving on, digital transformation is occurring everywhere. Manufacturing went from a mechanic-first to a software-first mindset. It happens even there. That's getting more and more. Well, not everybody owns a Tesla, but software is making itself more into the car. There was a talk that a car is a data center on wheels. It is, actually. And the point is that what does the data center pair with other cars? That's the autonomous car puzzle which people have to figure out. Healthcare went from on-site to physician-guided. And then the day is not very far when you're going to have surgeries and stuff done with that, where there'll be a panel of doctors with haptic touches. They'll go in, and after an incision is made, a glove will go in and feel the liver or feel something, and the doctors all over the world will be able to feel in their fingers what that is. That's haptic touch. That's 2025 to 2030. But a lot will happen before that in AR, VR that will help define the edge. Retail went from at the store to your doorstep. Even not by drones, we still get everything by 2 days. I can walk from here to the bathroom and order a packet of something I want on my phone through Amazon. The professional services model has gone virtual, and insurance went from in the office to online. But not only that, insurance is going to e-surance, which means that you pay as you go. You drive, you pay insurance for the miles you drive. So like me, I travel a lot. My car's mostly in the garage. I use Uber a lot. Why should we be paying $200 a month on a car, or $400 a month on insurance, or $75? Why don't I just pay the mile? That's cloud for you. So when we talk about it, there are some macro trends today that shape the digital transformation. These are going to occur whether cloud or no cloud. You have things like digital technology usage is occurring all over the world. It's increasing and it's expanding. That's going to push things anyways, creating about 1.36 trillion of business value. Urbanization, people coming to metros, all of us, all the cities here which have been tech magnets in the last 10 years, have seen population explosion. In Dallas here, Frisco used to be the northern part of town. Now my friends say there's no room there, and people are overbidding on houses. Same thing with cybersecurity, data sovereignty, and digital trade. So now, when we talk about cloud, this resonates with a little bit of what Francisco mentioned earlier on. This is how things were done pre-cloud, and this is how things are done post-cloud today. Well, what happens is that everything changes. This is, people used to do it yourself like this in a data center, enterprise data center, or a colo data center. But people are now getting used to this model. What this model means for you is that you order a SaaS application, the SaaS provisions PaaS, or infrastructure, and colo, and then there is data. But this entire stack provisioning is done through software definition. It's done through APIs. It's done by clickety-click, not calling up a human. APIs have become the communication method. You went from manual to automated. You went from weeks and months to minutes. And you went to months and years to projects have shrunk. So people are getting more productive. They're expecting more from everybody. And the question is that all of us are in a supply chain of sorts, if you realize or not. I mean, we are, I think, but it's the obvious, but let me restate the obvious here. There are the magnets, the future magnets where a lot of data is going to be residing, predicted, is colo, is at hyperscales. But there's a lot of data in the colo also. But they're acting more and more as aggregation points. If the servers are being bought by these guys, that's where new compute is happening. But old compute is happening there, but a lot of traffic management is also going to be happening there. And then there's a network edge. This is going to keep on expanding to billions. So all of this supply chain has to be worked out, and people have to figure out what the components of the supply chain are. But look what they ask: cloud-like provisioning, cloud-like consumption, easy automation, effortless scaling, agility, flexibility. This is what is expected from the industry today. And if we as an industry don't deliver it, we are not very relevant. So the point is that this is what we have to do to be relevant. Now, when you take that and map it to data centers, what does that mean? Well, there are so many things, but I'm going to boil it down to 3 things. The first is cloud-native architectures. The second is Internet of Everything and data center innovation. These are very transformative pillars, if you will. In cloud-native architectures, we are part of the supply chain. We've got to make the supply chain work. But look what is happening. 85 of enterprises by the RightScale Cloud report, they have a multi-cloud strategy. Multi-cloud means that a workload in AWS or Azure or Oracle and private data center or colo data center. It could also mean dev here, test there, but no CIO wants to put all their eggs in one basket. So this is going to happen. At the same time, the public cloud market is $236 billion per Forrester. The colo data center market is very interesting. This market, our market, is going to be $50 billion. Right now, it's in the 30s right now. So we are growing. And if you map this is 2021, that's 20. That's pretty good, actually. 50 billion is not, this is no wallflower as compared to that public cloud. But look at this, 7 million enterprise data centers. Well, that's the opportunity. If we do it right, those workloads should come to colo. I'm acting more like an evangelist now, but I firmly believe that if we do it right, we have to get them into us, because that's where we believe. And look at this, 600 zettabytes of Internet of Things data, just internet generated at the source. Out of that, 40 will be processed on the edge. Which edge? We were grinning yesterday from the panel. Which edge? We don't know that. But the point is, it's going to be processed on the edge. So these are humongous amounts. This is something we've never seen in history before. And when you boil it down to strategies, what I'm going to share here is there are about 4 strategies, which I'm calling software-defined strategy, a networking strategy, a modernization strategy, and a resiliency strategy. So the first one is a software definition strategy. And thankfully, Francisco shared a lot of that. But ultimately, it comes to this, that cloud consumption, DevOps and automation, ecosystem, the supply chain. We have suppliers here, power, cooling, mechanicals. They have to be API-driven too. I was at a conference last week with Frost & Sullivan, and the amount of companies in Houston who are using oil data and converting everything, pumps, submersibles, everything to electronics, and then from analog to IoT is amazing. So industrial IoT is going to hit prime time in the next 2 years. So coming to that, the ecosystem need a digital experience. You need an API architecture. We as a data center company need to understand this. So the mind shift change is this, that the square foot and the power, people talk kilowatts and megawatts, that's all good, that's there, but you can't lead with that. You got to lead with these concepts. And then a services mindset. And then the networking strategy. The data sources are getting distributed, but at the same time, they need to be aggregated. You have new places where everything is growing. Wireless is also growing. 5G is coming around the corner. So this is actually very, very key. You have distributed data and distributed aggregation. So what that means is, where will you aggregate all the data coming out from different areas? And then for that, you should look at 3 strategies. What is your Internet of Everything strategy? What is your interconnection strategy? And what's your edge strategy? Those are very key pillars of your networking strategy, if you will. Then as workloads change, you might have more server density or less server density. You might have more routers in the colo data centers, and you may have legacy workloads which are power hogs, and some of them are not very efficient. But you might have build out a data center which is all a wholesale data center which is completely going to a CSP, and now the cooling requirements would be very different there. So the infrastructure is also changing. There's convergence of stacks happening between networking and compute. And then sustainability. We live on a planet. We owe it to keep this planet going for our future generations. Never forget that. So power innovation, open source innovation, and some cooling innovations. These are my top 3. And what do we get with that? We are positioning ourselves for modern architectures. And the last is resiliency. What good is a data center if it does not hold up to things such as the hurricane recently or any other weather phenomena? But beyond that, the applications are getting distributed. When you look at the stack, there's an application level resiliency. Think of the early stage load balancers. When you had the early days of the internet, web servers used to go down, and you would get a page not found request. Well, we don't get that anymore because that infrastructure has become so table stakes, it's resilient. Similar to that, our value chain has to be hardened in a way that we are part of that. But if colos, the new applications don't happen in a colo, they happen more on the hyperscales, at least the things we can do is physical facility, network redundancy, and a data center automation to enable as much automation as you can up the value chain. Whether we like it or not, network and interconnection are going to be always the key parts of most of our business, because that's how we will communicate and talk with others. I think I'm stating the obvious. This is what happened recently, Irma and Hurricane Harvey and Hurricane Irma. Our data centers in Houston and Miami, people, this is where man and machine come together. Everything worked. We had no downtime related to weather. But people, made this is a real picture of how the data center looked like. People slept there. They couldn't get warm food. They had to stock up on Kind bars and granola bars and stuff like that. Who will deliver food when the city is parallel? Everybody's worried. Papa John's is not there anymore. I mean, they're closed. So coming to what we do in Equinix, this is how Equinix essentially grew from the internet exchange in the early days to scaling for the web, to scaling for financial traders and other ecosystems, and then the cloud, and then new ecosystems. But this is how we grew, and all of these magnified interconnection was the enabler for it, and interconnection was the magnifier for all of this too. We created something called an IOA playbook. So at Equinix, when you come and talk to us, there's a group of people who are focused on the physical aspect, the deal and the square foot and the location. But a lot of company is talking this language. They are talking the language of network blueprints, security blueprints, data blueprints, and application blueprints. These enable us to talk about network, security, data, and applications. So in other words, we have to have conversations that go up the stack. And this has helped us quite a bit. So evolving beyond that, we look at some pillars: platform expansion, which means new markets; product innovation, which is an ongoing thing; a go-to-market strategy with solutions, channel partnerships, and a business development group. I'm sounding like a sales guy in this, but these are some of the things we have done. we do have a firm thing on. So we believe sharing our successes with you and the strategies before I talked about. Even now, we have 4 strategies in being interconnected, be integrated, be everywhere, and be in control. And what that means for us is have leading-edge interconnection solutions, which fulfills all of our networking and data strategies, have vibrant business ecosystems. This is actually one of the most key things you can invest in or should be investing in, because without this, the ecosystem, you're nowhere. And then obviously, data centers, it gives us, those are some statistics about Equinix. We are 180 data centers plus and growing. And the last thing I'll say that everybody here in this room, nobody's going to come and change the world. All of us here are game changers. Everybody in this room is a change catalyst. You're here because you wanted to talk about change. So be the change you want to be. Thank you. Yeah.
So now I'd like to invite the panelists to come up for the roundtable on resiliency, if you would. David Liggitt, CEO of datacenterHawk, will moderate this panel. And David, welcome to the stage.
All right. Well, good morning. My name is David Liggitt, and I'm very excited to be here with you today. And thanks to the DCD team for putting this great event together. My dad always told me that it was a great business day in Dallas after the Cowboys won, so we all have that going for us today. And if you're out of Texas, you'll get to experience that. But you are here, you are in Texas, and in Texas we do things bigger, and so this is a mega roundtable. When we started this, we began with 3 or 4 thought matter leaders, and we've expanded that to 7. So very excited to get to interact with our panel. We all come from different backgrounds, so I'm going to walk through a brief intro of each panelist, and then we're going to dive in. And one of the things I would ask is that would you be thinking of questions that you have related to resiliency? This is obviously a topic that over the past couple of months has become more and more on the radar for many of us in the industry, given some of the weather events that have taken place. And so we want to explore some of that and explore some of the topics surrounding that. So I'm going to introduce the panel and we'll get started. So Aaron Wangenheim is here. He's Chief Operating Officer with T5 Data Centers. We recently heard from Francisco Romero, Chief Operating Officer with Softlayer. Chris Sharp is Chief Technology Officer with Digital Realty. Pitt Turner is Executive Director with the Uptime Institute. Good morning, Pitt. Ron Batra is an innovation strategist with the CTO office at Equinix. Jonathan Schildkraut is with CyrusOne, and he's Executive Vice President and Chief Strategy Officer. And then Stephen Warren, all the way on the end, hello Stephen, is Chief Technology Officer with Data Center Dynamics. So welcome, panel. We're excited that you're here. The first thing I want to start off with, and Chris, I'm going to start with you. I'd like to understand the mood of resiliency of users in the market. So obviously the group that's up here serves different types of users, large users, smaller users from an IT infrastructure perspective. Some of them utilize cloud as a service, some of them don't. But give your overview of where you think the market is from a mood perspective and how important resiliency is to the end user and companies today.
No, absolutely. It's a great question. So starting at the fundamentals of the data center, I would say that the overall sentiment in the market is they need less resiliency in the data center. What I mean by that is there used to be an environment where you needed 2 in, now it's N+1, and now there's even some variability inside of that. And what that means is we're starting to see a lot more failover across different markets, like Francisco was talking about this morning, where the actual resiliency and the requirements are explicitly defined in the network, the SDN type of capability where the application can kind of see the outages or be able to fail over to different physical zones is absolutely something we're empowering and in the middle of. And so not only inside of the data center, we can build pretty much anything a customer wants, but we're starting to see more shared backplane, more shared infrastructure inside the data center because of the fact the applications are becoming more intelligent. And I think one of the overlooked elements of that SDN enablement and that true elasticity between those markets is the network. right? And having that network intercoupled between the actual destinations for the customer is a very complicated thing. And so that's where you see products like our Service Exchange come to market, where that's 1 10 gig pipes to all of the critical clouds and all of the availability zones around the globe, which empowers that customer, or ultimately that software developer or the application owner, to be able to have access and reach even beyond their own physical data center. So I'd say it depends what part of the stack you look at.
Okay, that's good. So Jonathan, one of the things we've seen in the market really change over the last, I would say, 2 to 3 years are some of the sizes of transactions that have been completed in the data center industry. And for a long time, typically companies that had very large IT infrastructure needs would own and operate their own facilities. Obviously, that's changed to an extent. And so I'd love your thoughts on how do you offer a solution for companies that have those large needs, as well as smaller enterprise users, smaller companies that are coming out of their own premises into more of a leased environment, and meet the resiliency needs that they all have?
Thanks for the question. I think there are actually a lot of levels to that question. So sort of breaking them apart, when you think about resiliency, it's still going to be a different equation for, say, the traditional enterprise user versus some of the hyperscale providers that are taking up some of those bigger footprints that you've been talking about. For the traditional enterprise user, you're still talking about resiliency that has to generally live at the asset level. So you're talking about that being their fortress, right? That can't really go down. But even for those enterprises, as they look across sort of the infrastructure that's historically been available relative to today, in general, when you took down a big room, you were engineering the entire room to your least resilient application, which meant you were spending a lot of money potentially supporting applications that were either more resilient or didn't need the type of resiliency you were providing. At CyrusOne, we offer our customers, the enterprise customers, and more broadly the entire suite, the ability to have different levels of resiliency depending on the application that they want. And that is enabled by a shared infrastructure platform, something Chris was sort of alluding to in his answer. For hyperscale providers, for those large footprints, in general, you're talking about, again, talking to what Chris said, I agree, you're a change in network, and that change in network really means that their resiliency doesn't live at the asset level. It lives in the distributed nature of their architecture. And so they're operating, in every region, multiple different zones, multiple different compute nodes, even on-ramps, to the point where for them to pay for a high level of resiliency at the asset layer is ultimately paying for resiliency twice. So I think that as you look out across the sort of broad nature of the potential customers that are out there, you have to offer a product set that reaches in lots of different ways the resiliency that the individual customer needs. As we look out into the future, though, you start to see even more changes, and it goes right here to my friend's presentation that we just saw, which is that as we start to view more and more of the critical applications that run those enterprises as cloud-based applications, then the enterprise's own needs for resiliency will evolve over time as well. And so business continuity as a service, is very much, in line with the idea of taking applications which might have been, housed with an enterprise directly and pushing them into some of the platforms, the cloud platforms that are now available.
That's good, yeah, and I want to come back to actually both Ron and Francisco to talk specifically around some of the software-defined applications that are running the infrastructure today. But I want to pose a question very quickly to Pitt Turner. So I know many in the crowd have obviously heard about the tier rating system and probably been guided by that for many years. So Pitt and his team were the authors of that system. And so I guess it's interesting to hear from someone who actually wrote that and kind of has seen from a historical perspective the way the market has changed. And the way that importance factors have weighed into certain parts of the decision-making process as you look as actual physical infrastructure. But Pitt, talk about that. Talk about some of the changes that you've seen occur, from when you wrote it and then over the last few years.
Well, it's really interesting. I think yesterday I mentioned in the late 90s, early 2000s, when the first third-party service initiative happened, there were a lot of people who had physical facilities who could never deliver what the slick, glossy marketing material had, and many of them failed. It's just really that simple. In the second generation, we found people, like several of them sitting up here, are very serious, very professional, very accomplished, and they have really robust architecture. So there's a huge change in that. And as we're working with Enterprise, which is our legacy, if you will, Uptime Institute, started in North America, large enterprise-centric, and now we're absolutely global. The majority of our employees are all around the world. We have certified over 1,000 sites in 85 countries, which is kind of a fun set of numbers. And we have seen it shift tremendously. So what we see now, and it's always interesting to talk about the future and have to survive in the present. Because I don't have any exceptions with the vision that has been shared of smaller edge data centers with aggregation centers and the ability to lose a site. Maybe your service is degraded slightly, like a cell tower goes down. You can still make connection, but it's maybe noisier or something. And that's the future. But in the current, we have to be careful that we don't just assume that tomorrow will be the future. Our research showed in the first 7 months of this year, there were 23 failures, according to end users, who lived in a particular cloud service provider's environment. And so the service provider says, we don't have failures. So the clients say, excuse me. And so there's a dichotomy there and a creative tension, if you will. We can call it uglier things, but let's call it a creative tension. And I think as we move forward farther into the future, one of the things that is really interesting to hear is there are still data centers. As long as there are IT devices with flashing lights, there's going to be a place where they live. Where they live, who owns them, how they're operated, are they even staffed? Those are all changing. That's the dynamic part of what we're talking about. But we have to be sure that the network and the software failover capabilities are developed as they have been in some instances and proven on broader scales before we can just blindly say, well, we don't have to worry about it anymore. We are talking now with several large providers who have a vision of many, many smaller, let's call them edge compute. Maybe they're going to be a box at the bottom of a cell tower. I don't know what they'll be. But they're looking for tier certification as part of their assurance to their marketplace of a robustness, of a resiliency. And we completely agree that over time, resiliency will less reside at the physical infrastructure level and more reside with the interactability and transferability and all those magical software words. It'll absolutely be there. Yeah, are we there yet? The vision's out in front of us.
Yeah. So Aaron, as you and your team have built the T5 portfolio across the U.S. and how do you look at network resiliency and knowing that a lot of your users are larger in nature, but how do you feel they're looking at the resiliency importance of their network?
Yeah, great question. I think I was just reading a report over the weekend that some of the issues, if you guys look at what happened down in Houston, most of the data centers did just fine, and they did a great job of staying up. Most of the problems were with the network. And so I think that is obviously one of the challenges that we're going to continue to have. And so I think continuing to make sure that you have that redundancy, resiliency, the number of providers. Our core customer really is not on the edge yet as it relates to availability zones and going into multiple locations and things like that. They look for physical resiliency. I think that's one of our specialties, and with the Uptime Institute, operational resiliency, which is one thing that you didn't talk about, which I think is important
Good point.
to discuss. And so I think it's really, there's a solution for every user out there. Mm-hmm. There's a budget for every user out there. There's an application deployment philosophy for every user out there. So it's really kind of understanding what your client's looking for and then customizing and fine-tuning that solution accordingly.
That's good. So, so Francisco and Ron, one of the things you both hit on was the change that it takes place, or the change that it takes for individual companies to be able to be at a cloud level where they can actually utilize cloud infrastructure, and it does take change within the organization. So, Francisco, I was writing down, you said, the values are it's self-scaling, it's self-healing, it's self-managed. So how do you how do you get a company there where they can actually transition their infrastructure from what they've been doing in the past to actually being in an environment where they can interact that way and make the change?
Great question. I think if we had the answer, we'd be a lot richer than we are today. But it's a process, right? The hard part, I think, is really nested in the fact that you have, as has been mentioned, right, the present. And you still have the majority of applications and workloads that were architected and designed and built 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago, right? So you've got a business that is running on these things. And all of a sudden you have to say, okay, I have to stop, rethink, rebuild, and move to the next way of doing things. That's not an easy thing to do. It's not a cheap thing to do, right? So I think there's two parts to the answer to that question. One is in the willingness to go do so, which is where the people aspect comes into play. How do I step out of my comfort zone? I've been designing applications one way for many, many years. Now I have to fundamentally rethink how I built those applications. That's not an easy transition to do, right? And it'll take time. You do see, as you see the young folks going into companies, and especially in the startup space, they come with that mindset, right? And one of the fun things of having kids, my 9-year-old last year said, "Hey, Dad, when I grow up, I want to have a Tesla." I was like, "Oh yeah, that's a cool car." He's like, no, I don't care about the car. It'll drive me here and there. It's got autonomous driving. Why would I even want to drive, right? And it's that whole different mindset that is needed to say, hey, that way that you you did things for years and years, there's a much better way to do it nowadays. But I don't know that a lot of people can go through that out of the box thinking on their own without some of that external catalyst. And then you have the problem of you've got the data centers as they are today. You've poured millions of dollars into the applications. It's going to take millions of dollars to do it again. So enterprises in particularly get very, very stuck on how do I make this investment work, right? And you get the dynamic of the big companies, tech companies that over the years were behemoths and the leaders and now are fledgling and some of them are slowly dying, about realizing that it is not a, hey, is there a good ROI to this investment? It's a, hey, if you don't make this investment, you're not going to be around, right? We have that discussion with a lot of clients of, well, the cloud does all these things, and even within IBM that has a lot of older businesses, right? Hey, do you move it to the cloud? I think now there's starting to be a realization of not do you move it to the cloud, it is going to move it to the cloud. Now you can move it to your cloud or it can go to somebody else's cloud, but it is going to go. That is a fact as it is taken right now. Yeah. Now getting there, a little trickier.
If I can jump in on that too, I think one of the things that we can each look at in our own world is to what degree have we embraced proven technological solutions in our existing data center? Most of us have not. I say us in a very general term. Most of us have not. Are we using temperatures at the ragged edge? Are we, we all know the IT will work well at warmer temperatures, but are we running at that? And then, so we tend to step back and say, well, we're not doing that because we're not sure if it's going to work or there might be a wrinkle out there. And then we turn around and say, well, but I want to move to the cloud. And it's like, gee, that's going to require adoption of a lot more technology and issues within technology and wrinkles out there than raising your cooling room temperatures or your computer room operating temperatures. And so we have this funny dichotomy that it's like, well, I'm not going to do it, but I want to go over there. And so we need to work on that change dynamic. And maybe as we go back on Monday when you get back to your office, have a look and see what proven solutions are available in the marketplace that you have yet to implement. And start there. Because if you can't take that first step, you sure as hell can't go 1,000 miles to the cloud.
Yeah. Ron, what are your thoughts on that?
So I believe there's a few dimensions to this, right? The first dimension is that there is a set of legacy applications out there which are hard to change, and it's just easy to forklift them. I think what we need to think of is that multi-tenant data centers and wholesale data centers are going to be and should be way more sophisticated than an enterprise data center. So while they're depreciated, you should call them boat anchors or worse. Just kidding. But what I'm trying to say is that the cloud providers have set a bar for hyperscale and efficiency and economies of scale. But on the other side of the extreme is the enterprise data center. So we, as data center providers, owe it to the industry and for our survival and growth, so that we have as many bells and whistles which are usable for the enterprise, so they come to us. They don't have always a need to go to the cloud. That's one. The other dimension of this is that when new applications are being built today, the developers of today in colleges and high schools are not wrangling infrastructure. They actually know how to spin up VMs. Mm-hmm. So that tendency is going to happen and it's going to continue, but they don't necessarily have a choice. They want automation, they want an application and DevOps that goes quickly. But I've not met a single application developer who says that, they will say auto scale, but I've not met a single application developer who's going to say that I want to know the temperature of a rack at that point in time when I get beyond 250,000 hits to my application. They don't care about that stuff. So the point is there's a layer of automation that has to happen at that layer, the temperatures and the internals, which is assumed table stakes. And the application may or may not touch it, but it has to be enabled and it has to be fed somewhere through APIs as needed. So you're going to have a mix of many things, the new apps, the bridge to this. The ability to keep control in a colo data centers for enterprise IT is huge. Yeah. You're not beholden. You're not locked into somebody's mousetrap and sitting there. You know, back in the day when you had applications, people would hedge. Enterprise CIOs would buy a database from one company. They would say our database standard is X company, our application server standard is Y company, and our ERP standard is this company. There was a reason for that. It wasn't just because they loved the application or the vendors or a great golf game. It was because they could not get locked in. And those principles will never die. Nobody wants to get locked into public cloud and be chained forever. We're going to exit out 10 times the cost. Yeah. Nobody wants that. Yeah. So.
Jonathan, as y'all look at the hybrid IT solution that seems to continue to grow and continue to be accepted, what are some of the challenges you see with the transition from what companies have done in the past to making that next step, whether it's to a co-location environment or to cloud?
Well, just to agree with some of the other panelists, I think there is a human element and then there's sort of a technology element. Making a wholesale decision to take all of your IT and move it into the cloud is also a decision to sort of fire yourself and your staff. So that's always a tough decision to make, let alone the technical challenges with actually effectuating that decision. But I think when you take a step back and you ask yourself about the transition, and again, I think you can look at this in the US and versus other markets globally, because I don't think it's happening exactly the same way everywhere. But when I think you take a step back and you look at what's happened with sort of cloud and how fast cloud has grown, I think that the first leg of cloud growth was really tied to infrastructure. And you look back over the last 10 years since sort of the Great Recession, and almost all of the new business creation in the United States has been technology companies, and then you sort of have this generational change of how they think about architecting applications, whether they own actual infrastructure or not. But I think you saw this sort of big wave of demand for spinning up servers and compute cycles. But over time, I think as we look into the more traditional enterprise, what we're starting to see is that decision isn't so much a wholesale decision, it isn't so much an infrastructure decision, but it's really an application decision. And when you look at, say, the Gartner 451 or IDC, whoever's numbers are out there, and you look at the expected growth rates, and not only in terms of percentages, but absolute dollars, over the next 5, 6, 10 years, applications, SaaS, is expected to be a significantly faster grower than infrastructure. Again, not only in percentage terms, but really in absolute dollars. And so what we're seeing is, I think, enterprises are adopting the cloud. I don't know if we can push on the string here, but I think it becomes more of an application by application decision. You say, all right, you know what, this is a better workload to move over, or my service provider used to sell me a piece of shrink wrap software, and now they're offering it on an as-a-service basis. So Yeah, we saw infrastructure grow fast. Now we're starting to see applications. I mean, I can't imagine there are too many people in this room where their storage for their job actually sits on site. That's already in the cloud. Now applications are moving to the cloud. And I think the exciting part for all of us over time is really when compute starts to move. And I'm not talking about the compute that's I got a server, but really what sits underneath our desks. Because very often, data center operators were saying, what happens to the demand in room A when it shifts to room B? And that's sort of a moving boxes argument. But I actually think that the argument for all of us is a collecting boxes argument, which is that there's all of this applications, there are all of these compute that sits underneath our desks that ultimately have to migrate into the data center. And so in terms of having the right product suite, having the right people to talk to the enterprise, so sales technicians, all of those become critical in effectuating that change, helping our customers make that transition and build sort of that, back to the resiliency point, but build the resiliency into their IT architecture.
Yeah, there's been so much maturity, in our market. I mean, if you just think in the last 3 years, let alone, 5. But Stephen, so I'm wondering, your travels take you all over the world, and so you see, how different companies from all over look at resiliency. So I'm wondering, what are the differences between, the U.S.-based companies and how they see things in a very mature market, versus other markets that might not be as mature from both a, just facility side of things as well as, services that are offered within the facility?
John actually gave the perfect intro for that comparative look at how both North America, and I've just gotten back from Singapore, Hong Kong, and Tokyo just last week, and how there are those differences. And I appreciate John giving that setup. In Asia, cloud adoption is only at 5%. The story. And it's all based around application. Thank you, John. It is that application element. And resiliency is built around just that application. In Asia, we tend to look at resiliency as outcome. And Ron had the perfect setup also during his discussion where it actually is the application resiliency that is key in Asia. Additionally, I must add, data sovereignty is the law, both within Japan, Taiwan, China, Hong Kong, Singapore. Now we've seen it come across Southeast Asia and Thailand, Cambodia, Laos. That also changes how resiliency is looked at. Cloud adoption also in Asia has been a bit slower on the resiliency side because they've put new applications into it. That's where they've seen that resiliency occur. Cloud, for colo purposes, we see a much greater use of colo for resiliency. Again, Singapore's only 40 kilometers across. On a Harley-Davidson, I'm across it in about 10 minutes at 3 in the morning. Really annoying. The problem is that people have to deal with the data sovereignty, the application issues, and the resiliency on a tiny little island. And Pitt, thank you, you can't get above tier 3 in Singapore. It's the same grid. You can have 2 feeds, so that changes how they look at it. In Europe, very different market in terms of how cloud is adopted across the European Union versus the other countries. And there are also their data sovereignty issues around applications, application use, and its availability. So when we took your question of the proper role of colo and cloud in resiliency, they are different around the world. I'm sorry. And again, back to John's point of that asset class, the average data center built in Singapore is only to 6 kilowatts a rack. Sorry, folks. You go to Singapore and you start talking to them about 30, 40 kilowatts a rack, they just look at you, get out of here, this is the wrong country. Because they've built the resiliency into their application, into their colo environment, because they're stuck on a small island, and they're dealing with it. So you're absolutely right. There are differences. There are differences of horses for courses for countries, horses for courses for applications, and horses for courses for resiliency. And Asia especially has learned some valuable lessons about that, whether it's the Fukushima and the tsunami in Japan, or whether it's the massive breakdown of 2 undersea networks in Taiwan and Singapore.
Yeah. That's good. Well, so I'm going to take some questions here, but I want to ask this. So when you are looking at the radar in your data center operator, and you see, potentially something you can't control. This business is about control and how much we can control, and the more that we can control and automate to an extent, the better. There's sometimes that there are events that we can't control. So I'd love just the mindset to understand the mindset as a data center operator with customers and companies that are depending on you to keep their infrastructure up. What's the communication like? I don't know. I know, several of the data center operators on the stage have facilities both in Houston and in the Florida area. But so anything that you could share that you feel comfortable talking about, just your process in helping make sure that customers, remain with their infrastructure up.
Absolutely. I'll jump on that one. Just the customer command center that we've built out at Digital has been extremely rewarding, not only for us and our efficiency and be able to communicate to the customer, but also in the specificity that we can individually communicate with those customers. So I would welcome you to look at that model, because that's something we've adopted over the last couple of years and really transformed the way that we can inform our customers. But also it comes down to people and process, right? Where you really have to think through the team that you have and don't want to put your team in any kind of harm's way, but really staying in local communication with the actual availability or safety zones within the facility. Most recently in Miami, we were able to, kind of go to a redacted model to be able to support that facility, and the team there is really what made everything come together rather seamlessly. And then also the supply chain. Right, so the fuel, so if you do kick over to generators, you have the fuel staged at different zones and have all of the right resources available to that team. I think that's where having the right methodology and documentation in place with that global supply chain and being able to leverage those global vendors and even regional vendors to be able to support that dynamic is absolutely top of mind. And so the efficiencies that has been afforded to us with portal and individual portal communication back to the customer is really escalated our ability to support their needs and give them an identification of how their infrastructure is performing through all of these disasters that we're being faced with today.
Yeah, Ron and Francisco, I'd love y'all's thoughts. Global platforms, how do you best inform customers of what's going on and what they can do to be safe and keep their infrastructure up?
On the cloud side, it's along the lines of what Chris described, but multiplied exponentially, right? We have an average data center for us has between 2,000 and 3,000 clients. Mm-hmm. So we have to have the systems so that communications become individualized, personalized, and specific, because you can't. It's hard to have a full data center down situation, right? You might lose some connectivity, some redundancy, some parts of the data center. So it becomes really, really important to have clients understand where things sit. And the only way you can do that at scale is through systems and automation. There's no way you could pick up the phone and start calling people and saying, hey, here's where we are. By the time you're done, it's 4 days later, sure. And it's irrelevant. So it's really a systematic approach to where you have the ability to say, this rack got impacted, and that means that emails or notifications go out to these 5 clients. Bear in mind, it's not just a scale problem, but the clients in that rack 30 days from now are probably different than they were 30 days ago. Yeah. You have to keep up not just with the scale, but with the ever-changing footprint that clients have in your data center as they scale up and down. So it's a tough problem, and the only way you can solve it is automation and APIs, that API approach.
Ron, what are your thoughts on that?
I would echo with what Chris and Francisco said. I mean, the NOC center and the operations center is an evolving mechanism because people's expectations are also changing. So the email type of tickets are also getting old-fashioned. That does not mean everybody goes to Slack or Chatter, but people expect more real-time notifications. They want some element of intelligence or AI type of work you can do so that they don't have to take some decisions themselves, as in terms of recommendations. So we are enhancing our IBX Smart View and then enhancing our DCIM capabilities to provide that to the customers as two immediate things we're working on.
And Aaron, I know T5 has a pretty extensive facilities management platform, but how does that maneuver itself through some of these challenging situations like that?
Yeah, actually some great stories came out of Houston and Atlanta. We had some impact there as well on the weather as that moved north. Of course we have systems, we have communication protocols, we have EOPS, we have our business continuity plan that you dust off and you look at, and everyone had knowledge that these storms were coming. But I think the human factor was what was really so interesting. We had customers that were on the shores that moved into Atlanta, we had customers, we had more people than we ever thought we would have living in our Atlanta data center for several days. We had issues for water and food. We had a convoy that went from the Dallas facility down to Houston facility that we manage, just delivering supplies. We had 30 first responders who's, I guess they were staying in a library that got flooded. They moved into our data center. We had all sorts of customer, 3 degrees of separation moving in. So I think the people element, you just don't plan that, right? You go into a situation and the teams responded beautifully. And it was really everyone in the trenches, a team effort to make sure that everything was taken care of. So I think there are so many lessons learned through each of these instances about, yes, how we prepare, what are the lessons learned, how do we deal with our customers, but how do we get through it together as a team?
Yeah, there were some amazing, I know just from my perspective, listening to some of the stories, because I think the first people, a lot of folks in the industry, you're thinking, how are the facilities that have been built in Houston, which is a market, where the flooding obviously can be a huge problem, and trying to understand what happened. And, it sounds like from my perspective, and I think from many in the industry, that the data center, facility side of things held up, rather well. And it was also neat to just see the people element and people that were doing, I know some companies sent, people down to help from different markets. And so it's always good to see that in those type of situations for sure. Well, let's ask questions. So if you have a question, if you would, just stand up, and if you'd just say your name and what company you work with, and then the question, that'd be helpful. Yes, sir, right here in the front.
I guess I'll speak loud. My name is Sonu Kunkun, work with Android. I really appreciate your guys' insight. I would like to ask a question to just gain a little bit more insight. You guys have varying sizes of clients due to their digital strategy. So my question is, have you guys seen any pattern in terms of like onboarding pains that you see, whether big or small, onboarding clients in your guys' facility?
Okay, so just so everyone can hear, I think the question, thank you very much. The question was regarding onboarding clients and some of the challenges that can, the pains that can take place when that happens. So who'd like to answer that?
Take that from the cloud perspective, which is a little different, I think, than the data center side. And what I would say is it doesn't really depend on the size. It really depends on the workload and where that company is in terms of the maturity of moving stuff around, right? You can have a fairly large, a startup that has a fairly large footprint that built things to be mobile that you can copy, paste, replicate, et cetera, and then their problem is just setting up the configuration parameters for them to come on board. And you can move a legacy enterprise, one of their first workloads over into the cloud, that's gonna be 10 servers, and it can take you months, right? Because, hey, the network topology looks very different, and I need now to go reconfigure my application. After you're done with that, hey, the integration of my application into your hardware has some bugs, right? Even in a platform that is as standardized as VMware, for example, you can still run into hardware issues. Hey, now that I've moved it, now I need server number 11. How do I do that? How do I add that to the cluster? So it has to do much more with a level of sophistication and technical savviness of the client for us than anything to do with the size of the workload. If you get a client that understands their application is agile, can code on the fly, you can have a client migrate hundreds of servers in a matter of 30 days. If you have the opposite, it'll be months before 10 boxes are up and running.
And I think that's why it's such a holistic decision who you choose to work with, because there is a partnership involved in getting, different systems migrated. And, companies are not all the same. They offer different products and solutions for, different client needs. So the evaluation of who you're working with, I think, is very important for the end user community.
No, I'd agree. I would echo that sentiment. It's less about the size of them, but it's more about the expertise, right? If they've done it 100 times, they'll kind of understand that there is a lot of limitations around staging and electrical fit out where if they've done it a couple of times, they understand, hey, this is exactly what I need, this is what I want the room to look like, or this is exactly how many servers or how much infrastructure I'm going to bring in over a period of time. So it's about that expertise, but it all comes down to communication and just making sure that they understand the services that are afforded them and the timelines, because I think managing expectations in this industry gets a little bit complicated because it's a broader supply chain. So we spend a lot of time on the over-communicate and positioning.
Jonathan?
Yeah, no, I would just say, you know, we sit at sort of this balance between being real estate companies and being technology companies. And I think the industry has really evolved over the last, 5, 7, 10 years. And the conversation has changed from, oh, well, how much space do you need or how much power do you need to, what are we trying to solve for? And so I think that the onboarding process has become part of the sales process, which is we more and more rely on sort of sales tech people to work with the customer before they even make their decision. And as the world evolves from, all right, I'm going to take your stuff and it will end up in this other building and networked in a different way, we're big believers in not only the multi-cloud, but the hybrid cloud value proposition. And so over time, the question will be less about, oh, well, how are we going to solve for this particular thing, but what are we trying to solve for in a more global perspective? What's the problem? What's the goal to achieve? And how do we get there? And Equinix is a good example. A few years back, they bought Nimbo, which was a cloud onboarder, to get real insight into the process, the customer's mind, as they looked at multi-cloud or hybrid cloud solutions. And I think the rest of the industry has sort of come along with that, which is we invest a significant amount of time. I sit in a strategy position. We spend a significant amount of time figuring out how to best help customers think about holistically what they're trying to solve for, and then from strategy to drive it into operations and communication.
That's good. Yes, sir. And Eric, there's a microphone right there.
Eric Stocklausner, Aligned Energy. So my question is more about the value of some of these multi-tenant data center portfolios. It seems that some portion of that value is being driven by the fact that there's a lot of risk, pain, and cost associated with moving. And now we're moving more towards the largest transactions being cloud and multi-availability zones. I'd like to hear what the panel thinks about how that's going to impact the industry relative to pricing pressure. If it becomes easier for a cloud provider to migrate out of an existing provider into another one, what do you see the implications of that being?
Aaron, why don't you answer that?
Yeah, I think there's pressure in a lot of ways, right? I think that transportability is certainly one factor. I think that the consumer is getting smarter about what they want to buy, what they'll value and pay for. Right, so we were talking earlier about resiliency, and some folks don't want to pay for that resiliency. Some folks don't need to pay for it. Some still do. I think it's great. I think we are stratifying our businesses such that we can respond to what the customer is looking for. And so we're offering exactly what that group wants. It's great. We're not all 9.5D shoes, right? So let's get some variety in there and show them things. Now, does that impact the value? Maybe to some degree, but I don't think that I don't think value is inherent in what we do by stickiness with our customers. I think it's in the value that we give them and the services that we give them and obviously the uptime that we give them. So I think it's a right sizing of the industry, not so much as a degradation of the value we provide.
Right, and I would add to that sentiment in the fact that, we talked about keeping your foundation in what's happening today, but looking at the future, I would tell you with the clouds, and it used to be everything was cloud first, now it's AI first, and we haven't really even touched on the subject today, but AI has a very discrete set of requirements that I think are extremely tough for a lot of data center operators to support. So in your current design, in the current design we support, it's firmly grounded in what their requirements are today, but looking at that, Francisco showed a picture of the TPU processor up there from Google. I mean, some of the stuff that they've been able to bring to market, I mean, the power density in it is 10x what you see today. So it's not only saying, hey, I'm going to support you here today, but I'm going to evolve with your infrastructure and evolve in a very efficient manner to get to power densities and cooling solutions that haven't been seen in the industry today. And I think you're going to start to see a lot more of that coming to market. So building a product that can capture and support that evolution of where those clouds are headed is absolutely top of mind and critical for your future success.
Yeah. Ron, go ahead.
I would also echo what Chris and Aaron said, but what Aaron's words resonated is right sizing. And in multi-tenant data centers, which have a huge tenancy, the requirements of everybody are going to be slightly different. So then you really, for a site, you cannot really customize. I mean, you can, but it would be prohibitively expensive to do that for each zone of the data center. But enterprises are there; they're large tenants. It becomes a little bit easier if you have one large tenant in a wholesale model, and now you're tailoring it for that tenant. So, but when you look at enterprises, they are, by and large, they're subscribing to what the shrink-wrap software companies have told them in the past. Mm-hmm. So there is that part of that ecosystem one has to play with. What does Oracle want? What does X want? What does Y want? And those are the companies that have certain requirements. And there is there would be pricing pressure, but the point is that you cannot shrink a multi-tenant data center down to the least common multiple. It's more like the rich set of features, and people take what they want.
Yeah, I would build upon that. So, back to sort of the premise of your question, right? We are definitely seeing a shift in the industry where a certain set of buyers are representing an increasingly large percent of the megawatts, if you will, that are being leased every year. I don't think there are fewer buyers. I just think that some of the buyers are just getting so much larger relative to the others that they're dominating. It's easy enough to say, oh, these buyers can move from one place to another. And I think when you say something like that, you're literally taking the physical asset layer away from the networking layer in a way that really can't be executed in real life. So take a couple different hyperscale guys. You can look at them. We all study these folks, but they have a very specific network topology, which, by the way, is still evolving. They're trying to solve for a problem. So where does the on-ramp go? Where do the availability zones go? How far can they be from each other? What's the latency between those sites? What is the distance that they need to be away from each other in order to create the resiliency they want in their architecture? And it becomes really prescripted in a way that makes the ability to shift some of those assets around much more difficult than you might imagine. I mean, we've had customers would say, all right, I want to be in 2 buildings on your site, but the buildings need to be this far apart. And if you put a pencil down and you drew a circle around that building, there really aren't a lot of options. And so over time, I think that while we are seeing a handful of customers make a bigger and bigger impact on the overall leasing velocity, you have to understand that it's not sort of, it can go anywhere, but it all has to go in relation to each other and ultimately to where the network assets lie. And so you do become locked in a certain way. And I think that will have implications on the ability to sustain pricing over time. I do think that pricing also moves not only in terms of what's happening with a particular customer, but what we've all been talking about up here is sort of the investment you have to make to support those customers. And so pricing as this per kW may not even be the best way to look at it. Pricing probably as a return on the capital that you deploy, and that expected return has probably been much more consistent than what we might see from a headline spot number.
If we could,
yes,
David.
go ahead. Yeah.
I was at the Goldman Sachs Communique meeting about 2.5 weeks ago, and there is a huge dichotomy between what's happening in North America and what's happening outside. Uptake of co-location space by cloud providers in Asia is increasing, but not by the big boys. The only people looking at the big boys, the hyperscales, are actually the governments. They're trying to get them in, thinking that it's an aggregation play. If you look at Europe, same thing. It's the governments out playing for the business, just as the states do here in the United States. But Tai Sang in Singapore is completely packed. A brand new data center just built in Taifu in Singapore was filled up. And it's 15 megawatts filled up in under 1 week. That's pure colo. Not one cloud player at all. It is a very, very different market. If you take a look at what happened in Japan, Japan is actually outsourced through NTT to 7 different countries. And in fact, I love what Ron said before, because it's actually happening with, I was chatting with Hisham in Equinix in Asia. It's interesting that NTT is getting rid of the shrink wrap. Their 4 mega facilities that are actually out in Asia right now are 100% getting rid of the shrink wrap. They're Office 365. And Microsoft is their partner. So it's a very, very different market. And at the same time, as I come back to Goldman Sachs in New York, no one's buying colo space in a lot of different cities. Because either the market is looking at just cloud as a resiliency package play, or nobody can afford it. It's pretty simple. And we don't know when the other shoe's going to drop in terms of resiliency capability in New York City when we're going to have Indian Point nuclear power plant taken down. So yeah, I know, it's really good for you guys in Texas. So the point being that there's different markets out there. And also the pay-to-play market doesn't always work in a lot of different markets. People don't like it. And there's another major issue too across Europe, and you know this, David, also there's a big problem with what we often call the normalization of pricing. Just even 5 years ago, trying to figure out the different pricing in colo between different colo players in Europe would make your head spin. That's why so many people started drinking more. It became an issue, trying to get the normalization of pricing. Go to Asia, normalization of pricing in colo is not difficult. The numbers are out there and people are willing to work with you. It is very, very different markets.
Interesting. Well, I think there's a number of takeaways from today. You know, one is that, I mean, things are always changing, and with the change presents a number of opportunities. I think, you know, from my perspective, I always love getting to hear from multiple perspectives. This is a great example of, you know, how our industry is dealing with some of the same topics just within their frame of expertise. And so today is full of opportunities to learn from different market leaders on what's taking place in the market. Data Center Dynamics has done a great job putting on this conference. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. Let's give a big round of applause to our speakers today. And then I'll hand it over to Bruce.